the idea of resurrected bodies, and the more you think about it, because it's good for you to realize that you're not defined by this mortality. The morbidity of decrepitude just creeps up on you, and it just, remember how I put it? Age conspires with God to do what? To transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. And that is a wise thing that God's allowed. It's a mark of the fall, and yet we need this. Because it reminds us not only of our diminishing capacity, but it should become an obvious message. You're not home yet. This is a sojourn. It's a brief time of a pilgrimage, a journey. You're an exile, you're a wayfarer, you're not home yet. You're here for your own life to be transformed, your soul in this world, in this soul-forming world to be changed. But when you are there in His presence then you will be complete. And I love this image right now. In our spirit, we already are fully like Christ. Nothing needs to be changed for who you are before Him. You are accepted in Him. You are in the Beloved's hand. And you are adopted, and you've called Him in. As one person put it, that God in adoption basically took someone who was His enemy, someone who was treacherous, a traitor. And He took that traitor into His house and gave him dinner, and then gave him the family name. You see, what has He done? He's adopted you. You now have the family name. Incalculable wealth is yours. But we live like paupers, and that's in this mindset here. So to grasp what that will be like is a wonderful thought, and I'd like to do a teaching on that. And then the resurrected world, because the world, as you know, is subject to creation, to a curse, because it's waiting for our resurrection before it can be resurrected. But this is a pretty impressive world, in spite of the flaws and so forth in a fallen world. The world is more astonishing than ever before to me. I marvel at it. So I just anticipate, what will it be like? And when it won't be recalcitrant either. It won't push back against you, but it'll actually cooperate with your creative endeavors. And they'll be extraordinary, the possibilities. And thus I see that combination, an unbounded future, and you're going to be a gardener of the new creation. What will that look like? You'll do it. You could do things solo or groups, collectives, all kinds of possibilities of what we realize we never will have time on this earth to do. And one of the quotes I'm going to be using is that famous, I was planning to use today, I'll have to wait till next week, is this quote from Tozer's chapter on God's infinitude, when he says the days of the years of our life are few and swifter than a weaver's shuttle. Remember he says that? How that life is a short and fevered rehearsal for a concert we cannot stay to give. It's a fascinating idea. Just when you've attained proficiency, you're forced to lay your instruments down. It's most intriguing why that is. So you become skillful, but then we say youth is wasted on the young. We grow too soon old and too late smart. And the painful lessons of life, we finally figure them out, and then we're ready to meet the one who made us. And but the concept there, you will be fully complete because you see your spirit is already perfect, seated with Him in the heavenly places. Then your soul at the Bema seat, the judgment seat of Christ, will be rendered and purified, and so that there'll be no hidden things. Everything will now have been dealt with. And then third, your body, a resurrected glorious spirit, soul, and body, completely conformed to the image of His Son in all spheres, in all realms. That's rather extraordinary when you think about it. What will you be like? It's a good thing to think about that, because you're going to be like that forever. And you'll be forever young, and you'll have all ages in one. I don't know how that'll be like. But you'll be a gardener, so that the many things I'd like to do, I've often thought of if I had various clones, I'd have one person do nothing but reading books. One of me would just read. Another one would just be in a contemplative modality. Another one of me would be painting, doing artwork, you see. Another one would be composing music. Another one would be doing poetry. Another one would be looking at the natural world. Because I have all those, I don't know, I'm an odd duck, I could never be bored. I'm one of the few people who do okay in solitary. Because you see, you have Him, and having Him, you have all things in one. But you want to be a contemplative in action, and that's what I see it. So what will it be like? Think about what you know you can't do. Think about what you long to do, and you know you just won't have time to do it. Every new thing you do is another thing you cannot do. And so you have to acknowledge that. It would be pathetic, it would be sad if this was all there was. You long for more than this world can provide because you were meant for the eternities. And so he's given you an appetite that no earthbound joy could ever begin to sustain. You couldn't even imagine what he's got in store for us. But you will not be disappointed. And then you will be able to have the time, because time will not be an enemy, but an agency. It'll not be something that will take your life away, but it'll be something that actually is something you luxuriate in. And you won't be in a hurry. And you'll have all the, quote, time you need because your experience of space and time. It's not that you're going to be outside of space and time, only God is. But your experience of space and time will be to the glory of God. The whole nature of the new physics will be that way. And then your relational capacity will be so vastly expanded. Right now, as we've said, you think about how far back do you go and how far back in the past and the front. It's only a few decades, a few generations, that's it. Because I don't think we have the capacity to go more than that. In a fallen world, it would be too painful. The loss of my grandparents, worse the loss of my parents, worse imagine the loss of your bride or you see, and then worse would be, and then also your children and your you can only do that. You can only endure so much pain. But I do believe in the resurrected realm where there is no pain, nor death, nor sorrow, nor crying, or sickness, or mourning. There you will have a capacity, I think, to be able to engage in all generations, you see, because then there will no longer be the weight of death and of loss and of mourning and of sorrow. And so to me, that is a great vision as well. Your capacity will be vast. And then finally, I saved the best for last. And your vision of God will only continue to grow. And the more you learn, the more you'll realize how much you do not know, the mystery we call God. So I'm looking forward to it, and I think we need to have an appetite for heaven. Yeah. So I was just summarizing that. Yes?
So on the Billy Graham piece, you mentioned identity.
Yes.
The first out there. We'll just expand on that. That's a term, I think it's important. And what your
identity. Yeah, a new past, a new present, a new future. He was asking a question about identity, and when I was talking about that, the idea of identity, who am I? And as you know, the world will define you by default. Don't do anything, and it'll tell you who you are. And it'll tell you you're defined by what you do, largely. And that's a problem, because that's a very insecure basis for identity. So identity needs to be something that's richer than that. In this context of adoption, you have a new past, a new present, a new future. Your identity is a child of the King, and therefore, some of you, and Dennis knows where I'm going with this, in the spiritual renewal cards, because here we're looking at identity affirmations, and so if this is, you must allow the Word to define you and not the world. But for that to occur, you must be engaged. It requires a conscious, intentional activity where you train yourself to actually see that you are defined not by what you do, but by who you are. And I can tell you who you are. If you know Jesus, you are a child of the living God, so that you are a child of the King. What I love about these truths is that it doesn't matter whether you're young or old, rich or poor, married or single, or any of those things, it'll still be the case. And then look at this wealth of identity. I hope some of you are using these affirmations, because it's a good thing to go through, and sometimes perhaps even to carry one of these cards and use that one side of it and just review that. Because you see, you will forget. Haven't you all unlearned spiritual truth? You go to a conference, You pick something up that you think that's really a grabber, and then what happens a few days later? It's like you were never there. It's hard to hold on to it. We quickly unlearn spiritual truth and insights. You need to constantly have a reinforcement because it's contrary to everything the culture would tell you to pursue. So identity is the fundamental need that God knows that we have for security, for significance, and for satisfaction. And you can be secure in that relationship with the one who has pursued you and adopted you. You can be significant because you're part of something bigger than just yourself. You're part of something, a forever family that'll go on and on. And moreover, satisfaction, you're gifted by the Holy Spirit to accomplish something that can have reverberating impact in eternity, even if you don't even know what it is. And so every so often, maybe someone will tell you, you don't know this, but when you said this or did that, you see, you are touching lives. And so you have a diffusive impact. You can't quantify it. It's incalculably diffusive. So when I was in Charleston, in fact, and speaking on Wednesday night at St. Michael's Church, a few people came up to me afterwards, and I didn't remember them, but a couple of them shared some things that had meant a great deal to them, and they told me about these things. Of course, I didn't know that. And I think I needed it, because I was, sometimes when you need some encouragement, then God will raise someone up to do that, and give you a bit of feedback, but don't live for the feedback, because then you'll just live for that. But rather, most of your life is hidden impact. You won't know your impact. But every so often, God will, when you're down perhaps or whatever, He'll encourage you. You may not know this, but when you said that, you see, when you pray for someone, love them and serve them, you don't know what the reverberating impacts will be. So that was a great experience for me. And one person told me, I don't remember this, that they did a transcription of something I spoke that I did when I was in Russia, and they turned it into a little booklet of sorts. I don't even know what he's talking about. I know I was there, but I don't know what he did. But this marked his life. So go figure. You don't know what an act of kindness, of other-centeredness, of prayer, of generosity will do. Because true fame is not how many people know your name, but how many people receive something from you and through you, Christ in you. So that's why I say true fame is not to be confused with how many cognition, but with reception. Remember, true fame is not how many people know your name. You know, we now live in a culture where people are famous for being famous, for no accomplishment whatsoever. And I'm astonished at how dumb we've become as a collective whole. You just thought it couldn't get stupider, and it just gets dumber and dumber as it goes by. But at the same time, you realize that true fame rests in really the anonymity in many respects of reception. And how many people have received something from you don't even know what impact you've had. And that to me is a key. So what I mean by identity then is the world will define you by default and tell you who you are, what to go for, and what the values are. But the Word of God will give you a totally contrary narrative, and that's why you have to go against the current. And I'm repeating myself here, but any dead fish can float downstream. You see, just think about this. No dead fish is going to go up against the current like a salmon. I'm still astonished at those crazy things. They're amazing. And then how it's just the perfect time for the bears, just because they've just gotten out of hibernation. They need to, and then they do this hyperphagia where they just continue to eat like nuts because they have to gain 100 pounds before. It's
amazing how everything in the natural world connects together, because God is the one who defines you. And the moment when I came to know Christ really, the night of my remarkable experience in knowing Him, suddenly I realized the metaphor that I used was that this book is God's blueprint for living. So it tells me who I am, and only God can define you, not the world. But the world is more than happy to fill in the blanks if you allow it. So this is where you have to ask, what does your mind turn to when it's in neutral? And how much of your time do you spend feeding on the absurdities of this world, rather than the joy and beauty and goodness and truth of the Word. And when I say the Word, it's not just reading the Bible and prayer, though those are there, but it's also becoming aware of His presence, practicing His presence, and looking at the beauty of His presence that's all around you, and so forth. So train yourself to be basing your identity on that. Otherwise, the quest for significance, or for satisfaction, for security, can never work. Because you're going to look to people for security, they'll let you down. You're going to look to possessions for significance, that'll let you down. And you're going to look to a performance or position for satisfaction. And then the world has a way of asking you this question, what have you done for me lately? That's a long answer. I'll make my answers less winded and long-winded. And I'll be a good boy and repeat the question, yes.
So in relationship with Christ, we know as we sit next to our spouse, one of the analogies God's given us, we can touch her, we can put our arm around her, get a dopamine rush. And when we start talking about a relationship with Jesus, we understand that we can meditate, we can read, we can connect in relationship, but it's almost like it's just a little bit distant from that sitting next to your spouse kind of analogy. Can you speak to how you can even get closer in your relationship to Jesus or to God as the God?
Yes. So he's talking about the relationship to the spouse. There's something palpable. You can see her, touch her, and there's something very physical about that. But how do you get to know one whom you've not yet seen? Interesting text. It tells us, it comes to my mind, if you turn to 1 Peter chapter 1, and it tells us, though you have not yet seen him, you love him. That's an interesting thing. You don't have to see him to love him, although it's going to be, you will see him face to face. That's the incredible thought. And though you do not see him now, but believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your soul. So he's talking about the fact that we have not yet seen him, and yet we can love him. And it reminds me also of the beginning of 1 John. And 1 John speaks of this in this way. What was from the beginning? John has this way of doing that. Remember, in John, his gospel, that the one who was in the beginning. He's doing the same thing, but he says, what was from the beginning, what we have heard. Now, the we he's speaking about, there's a we, you, and a they in this epistle, but without going into it, the we is the apostolic fellowship, and the you are the recipients of this epistle, and the they are those who are in opposition. But he says, what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life. Hold up that thought for just a minute. They were privileged to walk with him. The one who put a face on eternity, put a face on infinity, put a face on the wellspring of beauty, of goodness, and truth. What would it be like to look into that face of the one who holds the world together and made all things? And somehow, mysteriously, even in his earthly existence, was still holding the cosmos together. I'll let you work on that one. But he was. And so I imagine myself then, I'd like to think of myself hanging around with him at his right hand, just listening to him, walking with him. Think of how many thousands of hours he spent on the road for 3.5 years. You had a lot of time. My suspicion is most of the disciples would mostly, as they walked along, sometimes they'd be with him, but some of them would be talking with one another. And there's nothing wrong with that fellowship, but you want to have that direct connection. And the beauty is that his capacity is boundless, and he has all the time for that. So I rather think of that now. So what would it be like? How can I love him even though I do not see him? It's the very thing that you're talking about. So, but you know you will see him. And so you come to know him, and this is where, again, going back to these cards for just a moment, that they play in, and you know where I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the blue ones on these two chairs, because these prayers are really praying for the grace of holy apprehension. And that's a good thing to ask for. Pray for the grace of the growing capacity to know him, but not in your head, is it? Because that's the problem with theologians. They fall in love with a doctrine, an idea, a concept, and not the person that it points to. I want you to come to love him. The way you're going to love him is going to be by knowing him. How are you going to know him? He's talking about here, all four of these prayers, Ephesians 1 and 3, and Philippians 1 and Colossians 1, all four of these prayers are about knowing him experientially, personally, relationally. That kind of a knowledge that goes not the head, but the heart. And only the Spirit of God can make that work. But you can pray for the grace of holy desire. And that is, even to make the prayer is an evidence of grace. Isn't that an interesting thought? Pray for the grace of knowing him better. And if you say that and begin that to do that, by I have the grace of knowing you more immediately, personally, so that I'm more prepared and longing to see you face to face as you will do. And then God makes our awareness of the brevity of life, or at least if we're thinking clearly, we realize how little time we have left as we get older. And so I think that part of this exercise in life is to transfer my affections from what's on this world to what is coming. But I still, going back with my wife, I've told her that we are dyads because we complete each other. And so the total is greater than the sum of the parts. This is why on any issue, whether it's finances, relationships, you name it, the truth is always in between us. It's always in between us. Because that third person, the us, has a greater capacity for wisdom and understanding than either of us. So we are dyadic, which means in Christ we're triadic. Means we're going to be together forever. Wherever I go, she goes because she completes me. That's a rather interesting thought. And your wife will not like hearing they are neither married nor given in marriage in heaven. But she will like hearing about this dyadic, triadic business. Try that on her, because that's a powerful image. This means the way you treat your spouse, your love for her is an expression of your love for Jesus as well. And so the way you serve this other person and the way you speak to this other person, whoever that person is, because they have the dignity of being an image bearer. So you build from this concept of knowing him experientially, personally, relationally, into this idea. So I asked that you would have a spirit of wisdom and of revelation, but he also says that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened. And he also says that I would desire that you would have a full comprehension in the Colossians 1, the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you would walk in a manner worthy of the Lord to please him in all respects, which is a nice image, isn't it? Paul says, I have it as my ambition to be pleasing him. So to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience, which is surprising. Strengthened with all power. Man, what are you going to do, miracles? It said, for the steadfastness and patience. The little things matter, you see. Joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. So here is a person whose joy is based upon what is to come, and he's preparing himself for that home. So I think to know him in this way is to love him. And then to love him, as we've said before, would be to trust him, even though I don't understand him. And I've stopped asking him why, because I'll never understand even if he told me. So I don't ask him why. Although there are the 4 whys. The why of gratitude is not a bad one. Why have you been so good to me? But the idea of trusting him and being grateful to him and knowing him. So to trust him is to obey him. If you love me, take the risk of obedience. Obedience is a mode of divine disclosure. I know I'm repeating myself, but these are truths that I find that are very important to me. I point one finger to you, and 3 are pointing back at me, you see. So what's true for you is even more evident that I need to apply. And so to love him is to obey him. And obedience then becomes an expression of it. And as I obey him, I abide in him. You know the routine. And as you abide in him, you bear fruit. And as you bear fruit, you glorify the Father. So it's a lovely image. That's my long answer to that question. But all these things connect together. But the way you serve the people in your life has got to be construed as the way you're serving Jesus. You see, your service to the last, the least, and the lost. Everything matters. Everyone, there's no little people, no little places, no little events. So then I can treat, because I find, for example, I'm doing a lot more stuff that I didn't do before. I'm making the meals now, and I am kind of like payback for a lot of service she gave me. So I make the meals, and I now have to see, and then I have to clean up, and the dishwasher, and all those other things that are involved. And it's a considerable amount of time. And so how do I view that time? Do I review that and with bitterness because I could be doing more creative things? Or do I view that as my service to Jesus because my service to her is that, you see? And then do I do it with excellence? I want to do it well. I want to present it so it's a beautiful presentation. Even though it's ephemeral, how long will it last? But it matters what she sees and what she appreciates. I always ask her, what can I make it? How could I make it better? Make it different? And she's honest enough to tell me, you can make it this way or that way. And I figure that out, and then I can do that. But the amazing thing is to practice his presence, even in the stuff you don't like. Remember, Jesus invites us to love people, even though we don't like some. Isn't that good that he didn't say, like everyone, like I've liked you? Because there are a lot of people you don't like, frankly. All of us are unlovable, ultimately. We're his enemies. But if that's true, if we can love people, what does it mean? What does loving people in agape mean? It is to choose their highest good. It's a steady desire of your heart, the steady intention of the will toward another's highest good. That form of love, then, you can do that even with your enemy. Can't you? If that's true, then I concluded, just by the same principle, he can cause me to love things I don't like. So I don't like doing those things in the kitchen, but I can begin to love them. You see the difference? Because I may not like them, but I can choose to love them because that's what I'm called to do at that moment of action. And everything you do matters. And there's no sacred, secular distinction. Everything matters because all times are his, and all invitations are his. So, and I also believe that he's given me enough time to accomplish his purpose for me. Even though this is cutting into other time, frankly, I think I look to God in intimacy. What does it do? You've heard me say this before. What's the relationship of intimacy and activity? Intimacy actually energizes activity. The more you know Jesus, I believe, the more your activity can be done in that way. To know him, to spend time with him, actually empowers your activity. So in that sense then, it's the glory of the grind. It's the realization that even the little things do matter. And the way you speak to people, the way you listen to people, is a big thing. Very few people are good listeners. Terrible. We don't have any courses on listening. I used to teach a thing for IBM managers on listening. It was an effective listening workshop. It was all days from Saturday from 9 to 5. It was a very interesting thing. And it taught me some amazing things because we don't know how to do it. But listening is an other-centered activity that requires putting their agenda above yours and esteeming them as more valuable than yourself. It's not going to be done really effectively without true listening, without the power of the Spirit. And then you hear. But that's what the beauty is. God listens to you and cares about your every thought and your concern. So all these things connect. All these things matter. So, yes.
Just in connection with what you said a few minutes ago about our impact that we don't realize, and what I've been hearing you say since then reminds me of something I read in Kierkegaard, who said, there's no lack of information in a Christian land. Something else is lacking. And this is a something that the one cannot directly communicate to the other.
Yes. He talked about indirect communication.
Indirect communication.
Yes.
It seems to be what it's all about. It's what Jesus did all.
Yeah. You made me think of something that I can't resist. When you, I don't know why, this just popped into my mind here. Kierkegaard on TV, he lived from 1813 to 1855. He said, suppose someone invented an instrument, a convenient little talking tube, which, say, could be heard over the whole land. Isn't that incredible? Even use the word tube. He's talking about television. I wonder if the police would not forbid it, fearing that the whole country would become mentally deranged if it were used. And that's precisely what has happened. Precisely. So we can learn a lot from him. And he talked about how he's the one, before the whole idea of the 7 habits, he's the one who told us that the destiny determines the journey. He's the one who says, live life backwards, you see. And then you can live it forwards. But he's a brilliant man who had a passion for Jesus and to knowing him. Yeah, part of it is this application. The application is the thing that links the head to the heart. You see, it brings us down, doesn't it? When you go to application, how do I apply this stuff, and how does it become more real in your life? And I think habituation. What your mind goes to, turns to, thinks about. And my desire for you is that you would continue to train yourself so that you can become more conscious of the truth that you live on 2 levels simultaneously. And very few people have grasped that. You have been wired by God to be aware of the eternal as well as the temporal, and you can link them both together. So you can think of heaven and earth simultaneously. So when you're talking with someone, you can pray for them. And there's every activity you do that you can do in his presence and in his whether you're driving, there's nothing so mundane, so ordinary, so routine, that cannot be brought into the extraordinary when it's done for his sake. So that to me is a lovely idea of getting rid of the sacred secular idea. But application. So you have to ask yourself, what are you thinking about? Remember, I've done this many times with you before. I say most men have 3 problems. See if you can get the first one is they have sloppy thought lives. That's the first one. It's amazing the things that men allow themselves to think about because they've accustomed themselves to that. And so you want to ask yourself and start training yourself to be more conscious of that. Is this thought pleasing to him? Is this word pleasing to him? Is this action? And you can just ask the question. Sloppy thought lives. Number 2, most have very flabby wills. They haven't trained themselves to stand firm and to hold on to something with tenacity and passion. They're not, and which leads to the third one. They have anemic intentions, their desires for life. They would accept a very mediocre life when God calls you to something far more than that. He calls you to live a life that has something of an extraordinary impact in routine, mundane ways, and yet will have a reverberating impact. So he calls us to a level of greatness that we often decline. So if anything then, I've got to become more conscious of the invasive media of this world and the absurdities. So I'm now so ignorant of the media. I know what's going on enough, to have but basically, I don't want to get granular, so I spend very little time thinking about that. And then guess what? I've never missed it. You see, one of my convictions when I go to a hotel room, if I'm by myself, and I almost always have people with me, but even so, I have my own room, I never turn on the television. Not because it's wrong to turn on the television, but because I have a conviction about that, because guys are grazers, and then they become gazers. See, they're grazing, and then they look for that, and the flesh wants some more input, you see. And I know, and I've never regretted not turning it on. You see, never once have I regretted, gee, I wish I could have wasted 2 hours watching idiocy and horrendous commercials. I haven't seen a commercial and I don't know when. But the point is, never regret that. Instead, I want to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, because life is short and everything matters. Every person matters, every place matters, every event matters. And then elevating the ordinary into the extraordinary becomes a great task. I think you can do that because you can begin to train yourself to become aware of Him, and to train yourself to pray for people while you're talking with them, and train yourself to ask the Spirit how you should respond, how to listen, what are you looking for. You see what I'm saying? Training yourself to become other-centered. And it's it's a worthy ambition of all of us. Because you want to live a life that demands an explanation. You want to live a quality of life that is winsome, is the word I often use. That there's something beautiful about the way you treat people and the way you do your work. There's something good about it. There's something true. So that you manifest those higher qualities even in the routine, in the ordinary. So teach me, my God and King, in all things thee to see, and what I do in anything to do it as for thee. And that is my desire for you, is to make this day a day that would have some kind of impact for eternity. And by listening to the Spirit's prompting and to hear Him and then to respond to it. So He may put a person in your mind. How often does this occur, that a person just comes into your mind and you realize that's an invitation, but if you don't do it, you're not going to be quite as able to hear the voice next time. But the more you obey it and respond, the greater your capacity to hear that voice, and you'll find out the most important things you do are those things that the Spirit prompts you to do in terms of any relationship. So when you're having your appointments today and you meet with someone, you want to be praying for them, you want to be listening to them, you want to be evoking God's manifest presence, even in the ordinary, so it becomes extraordinary. Those are things that I long for you. You see, I want you to be different. And you already are odd ducks, because the fact that you come here at all, getting up this early to physically come to this group, says something good about you. You see, you're not an ordinary guy to do that, because you have other things to do. So apparently you treasure this enough. So my desire is to give you a word of encouragement. And what I love about this time together is you don't know what the Spirit may do with one person here, and a totally different thing for a person over there, because He knows what you need. And you will hear through the Spirit what you need to hear for this day. So that before you put your head in the pillow then, or as you do that, you review this day and think about, what were those God moments? What were those experiences? And that's important. Yes, Lewis?
No, just to sort of leverage off Kierkegaard, he used to talk about the 3 levels of authenticity, about trying to be your real self. And basically, whatever behavior or thought, does it fit in your aesthetic worldview, your ethical worldview, and your spiritual worldview?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So everything you're trying to accomplish every day should be towards beauty, meeting your ethical requirements and your spiritual
that made me think of this little concentric circles. You've seen this before, that the spiritual is the most important thing about you. And that then should empower and enhance the moral excellence. So spiritual excellence, then moral excellence. Remember how I define moral excellence? One way of defining it is the fruit of the Spirit. And it is an excellence then that empowers relationships, you see. So a relational excellence is born out of the inside-out life of Christ in you, where you approach relationships not out of deficiency to be a grabber, but out of the overflow of Christ in you, so that you actually approach people with more than you need, so you can give away, and then you become a giver. And then the relational excellence, the fourth sphere of excellence is theoretical excellence, and the fifth sphere is functional excellence. There are many people who are functionally excellent, but who are relational failures because they live outside in, and they don't have the interior life to sustain a robust quality of life. It's like a tree that looks great, but it's about to fall, you see, because its root system is emaciated. So my desire for us is that we live inside out, and also that we integrate all of these things together, inside out and top down, so that what you do matters today, who you serve, your customers, your clients, and you realize as a follower of Jesus that your well-being doesn't depend upon the choices of others. They're not the source of your provision, are they? They are a possible means, but if they're not the source, then you can serve them and treat them with excellence, even if nothing comes of it, you see. But if they are the source, then you're going to be committed to manipulating them every time. So you want to be able to serve without expectations. All right, and this will be our last, because we're out of time. All right?
You mentioned pretty sloppy and pretty flabby.
Oh, yeah, so I said they have sloppy thought lives because they allow themselves to focus on stuff that is not true, right, honorable, pure, of good repute, of excellence, and anything worthy of praise. It's the Philippians 4 concept here. And this is, I find myself zooming in on this more and more. But the sloppy thought, like flabby will, because they don't have the power to say no. Because you succumb, and after a while you lose your capacity by habituation of being pulled down to, and the number 3 is anemic, I call it, intentions. In other words, your vision of life is too small. God has a bigger thing for you than you would choose for yourself. He has a more robust journey for you, but it doesn't mean it will be easy. Guarantee, you want to know Him, you will have to be shaped by suffering, because the only effective service for Jesus is born out of brokenness. But then He is the one who will redeem all things that are broken, all things that are lost, all resentments, all remorse, all sense of failure. Regrets and remorse don't have to define me anymore, because I know, even in spite of those things, that it'll end well. And He'll even use those things and redeem that.